On stream, I had a chance to try Unfield to learn Stellaris, even with the help of people who have played and beaten it in the past. Experiencing a game from the new player's perspective is an invaluable resource for when it comes to building a tutorial, and where game designers tend to fail the most on. We have talked about tutorial design in a previous post, and where I laid out 3 different questions that tutorials need to answer. What is the player doing? How does the player do it? And why does the player do it? However, thinking about it more, I have come to realize that there is a 4th question that the tutorial needs to answer about its mechanics. When does the player perform the action? Action-based games get away with not needing a lot of tutorial focus due to their design, because the player is performing the actions and seeing their results in real time. It cuts down on a lot of the learning curve. The problem comes in when talking about games with abstracted elements. In the video linked, I showed off all the issues I had when it came to trying to play Stellaris. Its tutorial does a horrible job of explaining to the player the why and when of its game mechanics. Without that information, all the player is doing is pushing buttons and not knowing what's going on. When we talk about tutorial design, it goes hand in hand with the other major factor of learning a video game, the new player experience. The new player's experience is where developers have always had trouble building their game around. For one simple obvious reason, they are not a new player. When you have spent months or years working on a game, every element of that title becomes second nature to you. Many developers, when they go to show their titles off at a conference or show, have said things like, "It's not the game's fault, you just do not get it," or, "Here, let me show you how to play it." Those 2 sentences are indicative of a game with a bad new player's experience. Designing the experience for a new player is different for every video game. The usual suspects of good design are having an easy-to-follow starting levels that each players in, and a structure that gradually opens up to the player. Again, the problem with abstracted design is that you cannot segment your design and expect someone to learn it. Going back to the 4 questions, every mechanic connects to each other. You cannot learn how military works in a 4X game without understanding the economics system and vice versa. If someone cannot figure out your game, or is enjoying the first 15 minutes of it, then they are not going to stick around to get to the good part. However, the question now turns to how to design a good opening tutorial in the first place. And a good tutorial must be able to explain to the player the order of importance and learning when it comes to a title. If you want your game to be playable for a wide audience, then you need to assume that brand new people, as well as experts, are going to be playing your game. If the design is not set up to have stages to act as the tutorial, such as in a strategy game, then you must design a tutorial mode for your game. With that said, it's important to understand how someone goes about playing your game. One of the best places to look for inspiration on tutorial design is watching how-to guides. Having someone go through not only the order of learning game systems, but what they are used for, can go a long way towards helping someone start to familiarize themselves with the design. And remember one thing, the tutorial should begin the second, where the player has to start making choices. Many strategy titles will let the player tweak their play experience. While this is great for expert players, this can be another nightmare of the player being overwhelmed before they have even started to play the game. Telling the player to push buttons is not the same as explaining them why to push said buttons in the first place. There have been discussions around dynamic tutorials, where the game will give the player hints and messages based on how they are playing. A simple example would be from the game Little Nightmares that would only show relevant tutorial messages when the player got stuck. When it comes to tutorials, people tend to prefer the two extremes, based on the game they are playing. If it's a title that lets them immediately get into the action, and they do not want to be hampered by constant tutorial messages and stopping the player. If the title requires a lot more thought and research when it comes to playing it, then it's good to have some guided instruction to help the player get their feet wet. No matter what, however, you need to provide some way for the player to learn your title. An easy way to mess up is to assume that people know about how to play your game beforehand. An interesting parallel is with the challenges of learning a tabletop game. You cannot always assume that there will be an expert player in the group to walk new players through it. There needs to be an effective guide to learning the game. Tutorials and first stages are often saved as the last things developed on a game, because of how the game is in flux beforehand. If you want your game to be as far-reaching as possible with your audience, then do not forget to think about the tutorial. For every player that gets turned off or overwhelmed, you could potentially lose out on a new lifetime fan. If there is interest, I could make a post about how to do a guide video as a companion to this piece, as both do go hand in hand with teaching a player how a game works. Developers should strive towards moving the workplace past being diverse to focus on making them more inclusive instead. That was the talking point. DU arrived at GGDC 2019 earlier this afternoon, where several developers shared their personal and professional perspectives for building an inclusive game studio culture. They advised how fellow devs can change their studio cultures to be more welcoming and supportive of underrepresented employees. The Director of Marketing and Communication at E3 Games Foundation, Wendt, began by highlighting the importance of retaining diverse developers once they are brought into the mix. Incorporated solution is active and ongoing, not performative or temporary. It involves not just hiring, but also retention. Tolerating is not the same. She led her fellow panelists Stacy Loud, technical producer at Harebrained Schemes, Alexandra Lucas, independent writer and narrative designer, Sonia Michaels, DigiPen Institute of Technology, and Wright, test manager at Bungie, into a discussion about inclusion by posing several questions. Why do studios need to care about diversity and inclusivity efforts? There is no single default type of human being. We need to invite the broad variety of people to work alongside each other. Michaels began. Lau chimed in, noting that there is not just one type of developer either. In order to fully make a product that's inclusive, you need to have people in studios that are inclusive and diverse. Those things go together. We need to get people in the door who are best able to tell different stories. Hiring is one way to do that. Lucas said it. What are the biggest challenges facing diversity and inclusivity at studios today? That's kind of where it stops, Wright said, referring to diversity initiatives. If you just focus on getting people in and do not look at your studio culture and broaden it, you are going to have the same problem tech has also seen. You hire lots of diverse people without making them feel welcome and they leave. There is also the fact that the distribution of labor usually follows upon the marginalized employees. The work that is done to make a studio inclusive is often voluntary. Lau added, I think this is part of the retention problem. If a studio wants to make a point of doing diversity and inclusion work, where should they start? Talk to the underrepresented developers at your studio, Lau suggested. Actually try to help people by finding out what their needs are. Find out what the actual problems are and then ask what the members of your studio want to see and then figure out the path to get there. You have to work with your leadership groups. Wright added, the leaders often set the studio culture, so it's important to find out if they will be allies, or potentially help them build empathy for groups they might not be familiar with. It takes a lot of work to get something like this going. Some folks do great consulting work in this area. Wendt said, you do not have to add this work to your desk. It can also be helpful to bring in people and pay them to do that work.